Leaders in cleaning, maintaining natural stone tile and concrete, and the first choice for landscapers, tilers and builders, because our unique protective products and technology are the best in the business. Prestige surfaces, exceptional protection, natural stone tile and concrete.
Have you had your eye on the house down the street? Or maybe you'd like to purchase a place close by for the kids? Well, now you can get the inside scoop on the properties you want with UPIN. UPIN is a great new app that lets you pin the properties you'd like to buy. And when they're listed for sale, you'll be the first to know. And it helps connect you with vendors. You'll never miss out on a property again. You dream it, you find it, you pin it. UPIN. Download the free UPIN app and start pinning properties today.
Weather brought to you by GIO Insurance.
We're in for a mostly sunny day. The slight chance of a shower, light wind shifting northeasterly 20 to 30 kilometres per hour. Lots of 26 degrees for the city, 30 in the western suburbs. Right now in town, it is 20 degrees. Winds from the north-northeast at 19 kilometres per hour. 20 for Penrith, Bankstown and Gosford. I'm Amy Mayan. More news at 10 on your news leader, Suzuki 873.
This is Ray Hadley in the morning, right across Australia. And good morning and welcome. Thursday the 18th of November. I'm Ray Hadley. Radio Happy Company on 2GB, 2CC, 4BC, stations on the Capital Radio, Midwest Radio, Grant Broadcaster Resonate Networks, and listeners on the 2GB, 4BC apps. A top of 26 in the city of Sydney, it'll get up to 30 out west. A top of 26 in Brisbane. We'll check the weather across the rest of the listening area shortly. And no matter where you are, the number is the same, 131873. Email me either rayhappy.com, 2gb.com, 4bc.com.au. Access information from the program by going to facebook.com/the Ray Hadley Morning Show. I'll start the program with some good news, I hope. You know that Zoe's Law has gone before the lower house and is on its way to the upper house in the state of New South Wales. This is a bill proposing harsher penalties for crimes that result in the loss of an unborn baby. The legislation, known commonly as Zoe's Law, has been 12 years in the making. First proposed after a drunk driver hit Brodie Donegan, who was 32 weeks pregnant, and caused the loss of little Zoe on Christmas Day 2009. And it's had many lives through the course of that period, and we've been championing on behalf of Brodie, then of course others who've been impacted by it. Bronco Huang, more recently of course, losing his wife, his sister and twin boys. The bill proposes to add up to 3 years to a sentence if a fetus is killed during a crime. The fetus must have reached at least 20 weeks gestation or 400 grams. It has been controversial among pro-choice groups who've argued it could be used to weaken abortion laws. That's just nonsense. It's about a criminal act. Anyway, I want to thank the New South Wales government, the Attorney General Mark Speakman, but also want to thank Chris Minns from the opposition, because my mail is that when it comes to the upper house, despite the protestations of some in the upper house, it will pass. It will become law, I understand, by January 2022. And that's something to contemplate, because it's been a long, hard battle, and well done to all concerned. I guess the fact that we've waited so long for it all to happen makes it just a little bit sweeter. And the other thing is a recognition of the child at law, a recognition that the family, the father, the grandparents can give victim impact statements on how it impacted on them, and a recognition that a life has been taken by someone in a criminal act. Meantime, we go back to where we are with William Tyrrell. There are all sorts of stories appearing this morning in relation to all of this. The Sydney Morning Herald makes an interesting point. The foster mother of missing boy William Tyrrell is the lone person of interest in his disappearance, but without physical evidence, nobody will ever be charged. That's exactly right. That's why they're fervently looking for evidence at the moment. No one's indicating that they found any more in the last 24 hours than they had found previously. There is a timeline laid bare by Janet Fife-Yeomans today, and basically Janet traces why they've arrived at the lone person of interest conclusion they've come to. I won't take you through all of it, but it makes interesting reading in relation to some anomalies in the evidence offered by people involved. And now the inference is while they're searching the bottom of that balcony, and Gary Jubilant spoke with Ben Fortin this morning. He was in charge of the investigation 5 months into it, then for the next 4 years. Never at any stage did Gary think to check that area. He dispensed the theory that the child had fallen or was pushed off the balcony, as the case may be. He never investigated the car when he took over the car that's now being impounded. That was the car that was previously owned by the foster grandmother, who unfortunately passed away, of course, earlier this year in March. Now, I made some comments, and Ben Fordham interviewed Gary Jubilant in the studio this morning. Gary Jubilant is someone who's enjoyed my support just about through his entire career. He was an outstanding detective representing the interests of murdered people and getting justice for those murdered people and their families, obviously. But in this particular case, in his attempt to find out what happened to William Tyrrell, he obviously overstepped the mark. An appeal against convictions of illegally recording conversations during William Tyrrell investigation was unsuccessful. Gary previously had resigned from the police force, and I know from talking to rank and file coppers and senior coppers, he still enjoys widespread support, and so he should. Whatever mistakes were made in his fervour to try and find someone responsible for the disappearance and subsequent murder of William Tyrrell doesn't in any way detract from what he did for a whole range of families, and I guess he's still attempting to do, even though he's no longer in the police force, by offering those families support. The judge in the case of the appeal, Anthony Townsend, dismissed Jubilant's appeal at the district court. In a democratic society, those placed in a position of authority have an obligation to exercise their power lawfully. The appellant failed to do so. The judge also said the offender, being Gary Jubilant, despite showing prior good character, had shown no remorse and maintained his innocence throughout proceedings. I do not accept that Gary Jubilant recorded conversations to protect his lawful interest. Those were the words of the district court judge. Now, he, in his fervour to try to find out what happened, overstepped the boundaries, and that's been sustained by the district court. And as I keep saying, that does not undermine what he's done for a range of families, in either finding the murderer or continuing to look for murderers. And the cases that come to mind, of course, relate to most notably the Barraville murders, where someone's been placed before a court on at least 2 occasions with no result in relation to the death of those 3 people, young people at Barraville. There are other cases, other notorious cases where he's offered his support, and of course the one that springs to mind is the death of Matthew Levinson, where he's offered great support to the fantastic parents of Matthew through a whole range of areas before, of course, someone was found responsible for his death. Anyway, that doesn't diminish from that, but the simple fact of the matter is, it appears that because he's already stated this morning that he has wonderful support for the foster mother and all the rest of it, whether his judgment was clouded, we'll never know. We may never know what happened. The current investigation may lead us nowhere. So I would suggest strongly that we perhaps stop speculating and let the police officers and the Australian Federal Police are now on the scene as well do their job, and hopefully give some sort of conclusion as to what happened to that little boy on that fateful day 7 years ago. While we're dealing with that, it's a bit of I heard Ben speak this morning about the minefield, about reporting this matter, because in all the years I've been doing this program, I've never ever received so many notes from lawyers about what I can and can't say. And that's not because of defamation. It's about overstepping the mark in relation to the laws of the land. And I'm not the only one. Every broadcaster on this network is giving the same message. Every newspaper editor, every TV editor and presenter and reporter is getting the same message as well. And as you sort of go through the volumes to digest all of that, then just after you get that email, you get another one about Craig Thompson. Suppression orders, this, that, and I mean, you'd need to be a student of law, and a very good one, to understand the implications on what you can and can't say. What I can tell you is that Craig Thompson has been hit with more than 30 charges, accused of being the primary facilitator in a multi-million-dollar migration fraud. I can't mention anything else. The 57-year-old was arrested by the AFP at Terrigal on the Central Coast on Wednesday. He spent the night in jail, as I understand it, because he was due to face Gosford local court yesterday, but officers missed the cut-off deadline to provide court staff with necessary paperwork to process fresh custody matters in time for those to come before a magistrate yesterday afternoon. He was refused bail by police and held overnight in custody. He'll appear in court via video link this morning. It's anticipated he'll be making an application on for bail. Officers will allege they found evidence pointing to an alleged scheme which intended to defraud legitimate visa programs after an initial ABF investigation into allegations of significant visa migration fraud dating back to August 2019. Thompson's accused of allegedly facilitating more than 130 fraudulent visa applications over 4 years, focusing on the food service and regional farm worker industries. According to the AFP, more than $2 million was gained through the alleged dealings. The maximum penalty is 20 years imprisonment. 9 search warrants were first conducted by the AFP and ABF, that's the Australian Border Force, July 1 at properties at Womberall, Terrigal, Cochabamba on the Central Coast, Reesby and Rockdale in Sydney, as well as East Maitland in New South Wales and Bundaberg West in Queensland. Additional search warrants were conducted on Thompson's Terrigal home and a Tuggerah property on Wednesday. He's been charged with a total of 30 fraud charges. 30. So, as I said, given the various orders from lawyers to all media, we'll leave it at that. There's another case I can't even talk about, which we started talking about yesterday, because there's a total suppression on that. That's nothing to do with William Tyrrell or this one. It's just something I can't even mention. In fact, I don't think I can mention that I can't mention it, if you know what I mean. Anyway, there you go. Anyway, we'll get through what we can report today. Now, there's a very interesting story, and I've had dialogue with Dominic Perrottet this morning about this, and he's replied that he understands my point of view. I hope he does. Clubs in Sydney's north will ban unvaccinated staff and patrons until at least January 31 next year, despite the government lifting restrictions for the unvaccinated on the 15th of December, whether we're at 95% or not. In a move which New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet expects will be rare, 5 clubs in the Northern Beaches and 1 in Mosman have gone a step further than his state government in keeping the unvaccinated out of their venues for at least another 6 weeks. Mr Perrottet said businesses which go further than the government restrictions will need to ensure they're not in breach of the law. Well, Clubs New South Wales respects the rights of members to determine what approach best suits them regarding permitting unvaccinated patrons in their venues. Now, the Mosman Club CEO, Gerard Boyle, said the decision would help protect his staff members who are, of course, in a position where maybe they get a lot crooked than others because they may have some issues despite being double vaccinated. Mr Boyle said he had received legal advice which said the venue was within its rights to bar the unvaccinated if the policy was clearly outlined in its bylaws. That's all clubs have to do. The bylaws are there to protect the majority of patrons and staff, obviously. Despite the Premier's expectations most businesses will open to everyone, the move of certain clubs to ban the unvaccinated has been backed by Health Minister Brad Hazzard and the Northern Beaches Mayor, Michael Regan. Mr Hazzard said he was a member of one of those clubs who would not wish to be sitting next to the unvaccinated patron. Well, guess what, Brad? Neither do I. And it's nothing to do with not liking that person. I just don't like the fact that, like the other 95%, 96, 97 eventually, for one reason or other, they won't get vaccinated. And I don't want to catch the virus off them. Not because I'm double vaccinated, I probably won't get crook. I don't have underlying health conditions, but I just don't want to go through the pain in the backside of having the virus when I don't need to have the virus. And speaking of that, we had that report earlier, probably a month or so back, about a couple of priests in Sydney, I think at Mascot from memory, who wouldn't get vaccinated. And the Archbishop of Sydney said, well, look, we prefer
I've got to service my Suzuki.
Well, not according to the Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge.
Yeah.
Catholic priests must be double vaccinated against COVID
within
a month under the precedent-setting directive by the Archbishop of Brisbane, Mark Coleridge. In the ultimatum, he warned that unvaccinated clergy present a risk to parishioners and face being stood down if they were not fully vaccinated by December 15. He said conscious objection would not be accepted as grounds for exemption. So there you go. And he's pretty powerful. He's one of the, of course, he's in charge of one of the largest Catholic dioceses in the country. He's also president of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, adding, I guess, a bit of weight to his decision to mandate the jab for 200-odd priests under his control. We'll see whether there's any reaction from other archbishops in other jurisdictions through the course of the morning as well. Now, legislation on parks. I've been getting emails about this and trying to get my head around it, and in some respects it's a bit hard to understand, but Rob Stokes says it's going to be good for us, so I guess I've got to believe him. He's the minister responsible. The battle for